On Friday, so before last Shabbat, I had the pleasure of being on a Beit Din for someone who was converting to Judaism. And the Beit Din was not my own. When we have Batei Din in the community, often you're asked by another rabbi to come and be on their Beit Din so that you can help make someone a Jew. It's incredible. It's always a mitzvah. It's always a joy. And a Beit Din begins with an interview, and it's not that hard of an interview. We're excited that people want to join the Jewish people. And often they're nervous and they think we're going to say something like yes or no. And we always say yes. Don't tell anyone I said that, but we always say yes. And on this particular Beit Din, the sponsoring rabbi is married to an Israeli man who sat at the table with us as the Beit Din and asked the person who was converting sort of like endearing and aggressive questions about joining the Jewish people. He was like, but are you really prepared to have pride and fear? And the person is like, yeah, of course. Like, what are you talking about? And as I was sitting there, I was just thinking, you know what? This is really what a Beit Din should be. There really should be like a hardened Israeli on every Beit Din asking people like, are you really ready to join the Jewish people? And like, God bless this particular Israeli who I've actually known for 14 years. I want to share my story of my relationship with him because when I first encountered him, it was in a very different chapter of my life. I was a very active participant in the Isaac Agri Downtown Synagogue, and I was, I don't know how else to say it. I was very, very much someone who believed in a shared society, someone who believed that the whole purpose of being a human and being a Jew is to take care of other people. I also experienced the world through the lens of, wow, I have been so lucky. I have had so much privilege. And the thing I have to do with that privilege is take care of others. That was my lens. And when I first encountered this gentleman, we got into a little bit of a fight because we were at the synagogue one night. It was just Shabbat evening. And I'm going to be honest, he said something that I felt was racist towards Arabs. And I yelled at him. I was like 23. He said, "You have no idea what you're talking about. I survived the 1967 war. How dare you yell at me for feeling anger at those people?" That's what he said. And I burst into tears and I ran out of the room. Now, on the day of the Beit Din, and I've seen him many times in between this, and even just last year, he said, "I'm so sorry I made you cry that one time," which is so beautiful. So on this day at the Beit Din, we get through the Beit Din. He does a great job of vetting this person. They're very excited still to become a Jew. And as they go to prepare in the mikveh, he says to me, I'm just so glad that you've really, really come around. He said, what I always think about is the verse, Im ein ani li mi li, if I am not for me, who will be for me? And if not now, when? And I said, wait, you're missing the verse that's in the middle of that. So I'm going to read you this whole verse. It comes from Pirkei Avot. It's in the words of Hillel, our sage, who says, Im ein ani li mi li, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? Ucheshani la'atzmi ma ani. And when I am only for myself, what am I? Ve'im lo achshav eimatai. And if not now, when? You've heard this before. You've heard parts of it quoted. You've heard it as some kind of mantra or slogan. And what I want to offer today, and what I said to him in this moment, is, it sucks, but it's the whole thing. We can't pick one part of this slogan. And why I wanted to share this with you and why I wanted to share our backstory with you is because when I first met him, I only lived in the land of When I am only for myself, what am I? And when I met him on Friday, again, he was inhabiting the land of, if I am not for me, who will be for me? And what I felt in that moment so clearly, and what I was finally able to articulate with him from a place of love, where we could both nod at the end of our encounter, was that it is both. It is profoundly and challengingly both. We have to stand up for ourselves. We have to love ourselves. And we have to inhabit the world in a way that makes us porous and interconnected, and yes, in that sense, vulnerable to how other people misjudge us, mistreat us, and simply don't understand who we are and what our story is. We hold both of those, and that is a spiritual lesson. It is not a political message. This is something we each have to do inside of ourselves. And for that, I want to turn to this week's Parshat Toldot, and I want to talk about the wells that I mentioned when we began reading from the Torah this morning. We are told that Yitzchak was a well digger. Right before the part of the Parsha that we read, we were told that Isaac redug the wells that had been dug in the days of his father Abraham, and which the Philistines, not to be confused with contemporary Palestinians, okay? Though Palestine, Philistine was a name given to that land. The Philistines, an ancient Canaanite people, had stopped up after Abraham's death. And then Isaac went about and gave these wells the same name that his father had given them. The years in between when I first met my friend and when I was with him again on Friday, I became a well digger. I opened wells that had been stopped up in my own Jewish life. I was not given a strong sense of belonging to the Jewish people. Yes, I was raised in a Jewish home. I was absolutely given a Jewish identity, but it was very easy for me to cut myself off from a feeling of interconnectedness with the Jewish people. And I worked tirelessly for 14 years to retrace the path of my ancestors and to find my way back to feeling deeply rooted in the world as a Jew. And this was hard work. And the reason I share it with you this morning is partly because I actually don't assume that this is a shared journey. I actually think many people, God bless, are inheritors of a tradition that is consistent in your lineage. But I want you to understand my personal story because I think it is part of what's playing out across the Jewish world right now. Part of the friction and the fissures that we feel between our people and the American Jewish community is these tensions between someone like me, who had to work so hard to come to love myself as a Jew. Isaac was a well digger, and as I said earlier, he represented continuity between the patriarchs. He came from a generation of Abraham, who undoubtedly iconoclast, went out into the world believing in a particular God and set a new path for our people and even for humanity. And Jacob, who changes us from one family into a tribe, who becomes the father of 12 different tribes. Isaac is the link between them. And this Parshat Toldot, is the Parsha of Isaac's story, in which Isaac digs wells. That is his primary act. And he doesn't just dig wells, he reclaims wells that had been done by Abraham in Abraham's day. He redigs them, and he finds in them what's called Mayim Chayim, living water. The verses that I want us to look at together, you don't have to open your Tanakh, but if you'd like to, it's on page 151. The verses that I want us to look at are thus. Isaac's servants, digging in the wadi, found there a well of spring water. And the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." So he named that well Esek, because they had contended with him. And when they dug another well, they disputed over that one also. And so he named it Sitnah. He moved from there and dug yet another well, and this time they did not quarrel with him. So he called it Rehovot, saying, "Now at last Hashem has granted us ample space to increase in the land." Ramban reads these three wells as three sort of phases in Jewish history. He says the first, Esek, which means contention, that is an allusion to Beit Rishon, to the first temple, to the first sanctuary that was built by Solomon and destroyed by the Babylonians and resulted in our first dispersion from the land as a people. Then the second, he called Sitnah, which means enmity, a harsher name than the first. This refers to the Beit Sheni, the second house, the second sanctuary, which was built by the Jews who returned from Babylonian captivity and which was destroyed by the Romans, which has indeed been referred to by this very name in another part of our tradition in the book of Ezra, that is called Sitnah, enmity. And so we recall through these two first wells and through the enmity that surrounds them, through the suffering and trials and dispersion of the Jewish people, those are the wells that Isaac first redigs and that there's so much contention around. This third well, Ramban goes on to say, is called Rechovot, spacious. Rechava, spaciousness. And he says, this is a reference to the future house, which will be speedily built in our days, and it will be done without quarrel and feud. Well, there are times when the Torah speaks to us and you're like, what? How can it be that you ask me to see the world so close and yet so far away from our experiences of it? Wow, this tradition is telling us that there are phases in Jewish life and that there have been throughout history enmity and contention and hatred and attack, and that there will come a day when we have a place in the land and somehow it is without quarrel and feud, and that will be a time of spaciousness. Now, I spent a lot of time sharing with you where I come from in all of this, because I want you to understand, for me, and it does not have to be for anybody else in this room, for me, I have been searching for Mayim Chayim in our tradition for a long time. I have tried not to be Pollyannish about it. I have tried not to say that everybody's right and we have to change, and I've tried not to say that we don't have to change and that everybody else is wrong. I have tried very hard to live into a vision that honestly causes me great pain, which is a reality that in a world, for there to be no quarrel and feud, we all have to understand each other. And why would I teach this Torah right now, besides that it's in the Parsha and I felt compelled to teach it? Why would I offer this? Because I want to offer that this perspective, which I live inside of it, this perspective is one ray of hope in this moment. This isn't a perspective that what's happening right now is wrong. We are defending ourselves. We are fighting for our lives and our dignity in every corner. And I want to be very clear that I believe that that is absolutely going on, and that this is absolutely a moment of im ein ani li mi li. And I'm personally also holding I'm gripping with my hands the other part of that verse that reminds me every day, if I'm only for myself, what will I be? And I want to offer that my understanding of how we would build a place that is without quarrel or feud comes in two parts. That we have to know who we are. We have to know our own truths. And we have to know them, and we have to own them, even when they conflict with others. And that is actually work that can begin from the inside out. For my generation, that work absolutely has to begin from the inside out. We need to reconstruct our own understanding that the Jewish people are worthy of protection, no matter if we're perfect, no matter if we're right in some objective reality. And we will fight for our lives from that place. And there is also work that begins from the outside in. Right now, that looks like war. We're fighting for our lives. And my one prayer that I offer that place is that God will hold some possibility that we could be understood. So as we do this inner work, of staying supple in our hearts, of staying loving in our hearts, even when we feel under attack, even when we feel in fear, as we do the work of still believing that we can live in some shared society and some peace, as we do that work, we also defend ourselves. We also fight. And all I ask is that you can see that, at least for me, I'm holding both at once. I know what I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for a world where all can live in dignity and safety and protection. And we have to do this simultaneously. We have to do it without fear. Maintaining connection in this world is actually, I believe, more important than being right. And I only offer that because it is something I sit with every day. Every day. And I want to close by sharing the opening lines of the Torah that we read today, because I think they're beautiful. In them, Isaac has dug these 3 wells, and he's ended with the well of Rehovot, and then we're told he went to Beersheba, and that night the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God, your father Abraham, fear not, for I am with you, and I will bless you, and I will increase your offspring for the sake of my servant Abraham. So he built an altar there, and he invoked the Lord by name, and Isaac pitched his tent, and then Abimelech, who is from Gerar, who had been the sort of instigator in these other wells' strife, Abimelech came to him from Gerar with Achuzat his counselor and Phichol, chief of the troops. And Isaac said to them, why have you come to me, seeing that you've been hostile to me and have driven me away from you? And they said, we now see plainly that the Lord has been with you. And we thought, let there be a sworn treaty between our 2 parties, between you and us. Let us make a pact with you, that you will not do us harm, just as we will not molest you. And then let us all be blessed by the Lord. That is all I have today. Shabbat Shalom, a Shabbat of peace.